Dan, Jason, you've just got back from ISCT in New Orleans. One thing I love about ISCT, it moves around, different venue. I think one of those conferences that really brings together the academic community, the trade show, and the networks in a different way to any others. Really interested what the general mood, obviously lots going on at the moment, interesting times politically, economically, but also within the cell therapy community. What was the overall mood of the conference this year?
There's a little bit of discomfort, I think, is probably fair to say. There's both people are recognizing the challenges that it's taking to scale up therapies. I think investor sentiment at the moment is definitely weaker than it has been in the past. And it gets observed a little bit. We're still talking in the conference about many of the same things, but I think this is normal. I think if you look at there's Gartner's hype cycle for new industries, and you go through a period with a peak of inflated expectations. There's a little bit of a trough, and I think the key is actually now the hard bit is happening. We're building, making slow progress, but slow and steady progress, getting to the point where these therapies are gradually getting out to more and more patients. And so on the one hand, you have the slight discomfort. On the other hand, I think depending on who you talk to, there's a muted optimism of just working through the problems and solving the hard work.
And I've actually, as I think about this, I realize I've been thinking a lot about it since the meeting last week, which is that there's a general sort of, how did you term it? Dissatisfaction or disturbance in the force. But actually, I think it's in some ways an overinflated pessimism at the moment, which is there are a lot of challenges. And I don't know if it's by habit that at these meetings we're used to talking about the challenges, because challenges are what we have to surmount, and every challenge we surmount makes us stronger. And of course, the road isn't going to be all plain sailing, to mix analogies. Are we so used to talking about challenges we don't talk about the success we're having along the way? And I came out of it with looking at my own natural tendency to be optimistic and trying to dispel that, and thinking, where is the industry? And I think, not to talk too lightly about it, but cheer up. We're talking about at the moment we're treating more patients than ever before with cell and gene therapies. And I think, to your point, depends on who you're talking to. The leaders in the industry are leading from the front, and they're experiencing the successes, and they're experiencing the challenges but surmounting them, and they are making their way up that steep hill towards where the industry needs to be. There's a lot of talking in the rest of the industry, the close followers on, where they're really still head deep in the challenges. And of course, I'm not making light of the fact that we are losing some really good companies, some really good products. Companies are finding it hard to raise money. But on the investor side, I think if you're talking pessimistically as an industry, surely that's a little bit self-determining in investor disinterest. And that actually we have a cycle of negative talk, overly emphasizing challenges, that feeds back to investors, and they're thinking, oh, this sounds a risky prospect.
Well, I think it's where the center of gravity in the industry has been, because I think originally a lot of the work was on the scientific innovation, bringing new types of therapies in. I think, and a lot of that investor driven. I think now, as there's been more pharma companies building in, it really is starting to be how do we build scale? How do we build the infrastructure and going forward and still make, some really impressive process improvements, moving to 3-day processes, or doing big acquisitions for in vivo CAR T.
So I think that's really interesting. So not just about the challenges, but overcoming those challenges. We're going to change that narrative. Well, what stood out in terms of things that you heard at ISCT in terms of people that have overcome those challenges? You mentioned there kind of breakthroughs in reducing processing times. What were your headlines in where you felt there are challenges that have been discussed, but people weren't just talking about the difficulties, they're talking about the solutions?
I think people were talking about a lot of solutions, and actually, to add what I was saying before, in some ways, this might seem a bit cynical, people are talking about the challenges in a self-interested way, that people may have solutions that they're talking about big challenges and how that the industry is doing things wrong here, here, and here. Oh, well, our company has the solution. So there's a lot of that, in which case you could think the challenges are maybe bigger than they are. But one ray of sunshine, or a couple in a few sessions that maybe overemphasize the challenges. A couple of people stood up in the Q&A sessions at the end, shining a light of positivity and saying, but Carvicti and Breyanzi and other therapies in our industry are an upturn of the graph in terms of numbers, where patients are getting reached. Not all of them, and we have to do something about that, but we are. And that, to hear others get up and challenge all the talk about problems with some of the positivity was really good to hear.
Yeah, and I think you only had to walk into the trade floor to see that there's more and more different types of tools appearing, more different suppliers, each solving their own specific challenges, and some of those challenges, it's not a complete change, but it's moving things just a little bit further up that curve to the next level. One of the things that was interesting for me is I was on went to a panel which was on it was talking about the recent risks with secondary malignancies in terms of CAR T therapies, and it had a number of people involved in actually identifying those secondary malignancies, but also had Tom Whitehead. But one of the things that just came out so clearly there is, yes, there's a risk in those for these therapies, but that risk is small, and we need to do work to address that risk. But the risk is small and vastly outweighed by still just the really positive effect that these therapies can have, which came out so strongly on the effect on patients, their families, and the impact these therapies can have to change patients' lives. And so it was a very nice positive story coming out of challenges need to be fixed, but overall, let's not lose sight of the key impact that this industry can have.
And just moving the conversation onto automation, obviously something very close to our hearts and something we believe can look to address some of these. It's a narrative, certainly I felt through this year at events. It's definitely featuring more and more in the conversation, but being spoken about in a lot of different ways. Interesting kind of, how is automation being described at ISCT, and how are people continuing that narrative and looking to deploy it to solve some of these things we've been talking about here?
I was at the ICT commercialization signature series on the first day, where there was a few different discussions around automation and industrialization. One of the things that was interesting to me was maybe different to what I think had been spoken about in previous conferences, was timing started to come in a lot more. Is that what's the right time to adopt different types of automation, and when to try and industrialize processes, and also the differences between automating individual unit operations and processes, which might be to reduce labor, but also to improve quality and cost. And then the need for automation to actually industrialize and make lots of different lots of different batches all happen in parallel, and the different challenges that poses.
Yeah, I saw a common theme running over from Meeting on the Med, which is a lot of cross purposes with people using the word automation, and a lot of confusion with people hearing the term automation in conversations if it's not specified enough. And as you say, there's really a big difference between unit operation automation and whole process automation, or manufacturing automation. And you can imagine there's a lot more talk on unit operation automation, because there's a lot more people in that exhibit, as you say, which is probably one of the biggest ones I've seen in the last year or so, with lots of different options around things like different bioreactors. It's quite astounding if you look around, different types of bioreactors, new options around cell selection, the usual options around cell washing, non-viral transfection, pushing forward. And in fact, those companies with new announcements and progress. So there's a lot of different technologies. I take what you said about the timing, and actually, I think it's mostly those companies that are improving those unit operations and employing new devices that talk about timing. And actually, I thought this is a new conversation, and then caught myself a day in or so thinking, no, this is an old conversation. When do you employ unit operation automation? When do you look as a technology provider to get a device into a process? Early. The answer is always early. Obviously, the difference for us, and I had a lot of conversations like this, is, well, but for full automation, industrialization, you should be able to do it late. So you're not taking a gamble with your own manufacturing investment. You need a system like Cellular Origins, where you can step from benchtop devices into a full robotically operated manufacturing process and platform. So yeah, timing was a big subject and it came up a lot. But again, it's sort of mixed with that confusion when the word automation is used.
Big event, a couple of thousand people, tens of presentations. If you were just to pick one that stood out for you, what would you go for?
So I'm going to have to go back to the one actually on, oddly enough, secondary malignancies, but it was just how much it drove home the patient impact. Again, which for me, one of the things of going to these conferences is, again, just driving it home on what that impact is.
Okay, well, I'm going to be truthful about this. My favorite session was one where actually, I won't say who was involved, but they were talking a lot about automation, about how to reach patients we need automation. And yeah, again, they were very much talking about unit operation automation. But again, a ray of hope for at least for me to feel like the session was worthwhile. At the end, some colleagues at Fresenius very much strongly made the point that, hey, you're talking about, improving unit operations, but there are robotic solutions out there like a Cellular Origins that are really beginning to now scaling an automation of scale. And I was like, well, they said that first. I was like, hallelujah, fantastic. Little fist pump to myself. And then they mentioned our company name. I was like, fantastic. All right. So that's a little self-interested in terms of what stood out for me. But I think I just liked it from a more, 60,000 foot level, because it sort of pierced through that confusion talking around automation and manufacturing, and kind of dialed in on what we need now, really.
Definitely a time, I think, of a lot of uncertainty. We had a lot of change in the FDA with NIH funding. The investment community, it's still a little unclear how investors are going to shake out, I think, in 2025. Interested in what kind of the general sentiment was around that uncertainty that we've got layered onto what is a nascent industry in cell therapy.
I found, so in terms of the global situation, I found the outlook positive, or rather not negative, which is, we don't know the way in which things are going. We will take them as they come, and we will react in the best way that we have to react. If anything, shaking up the status quo is a good thing. It makes us reanalyze, relook, and make efficiencies. If people talk about tariffs, but nobody knows, so we'll take those as we come. People talk about inshoring manufacturing into the US. To some degrees, that happens anyway. Interesting discussion around what was happening anyway, what's new that's been invested into manufacturing in the US. And let's not forget, between North America and Europe, 2/3 or more of the industry is in the US. So, yeah, positive. Well, let's say anticipatory, which I think is a new word I just made up, to positive.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's people recognizing that there's uncertain situation around them, but quietly getting on, making progress, not letting that get in the way of getting these therapies to more patients.
I will balance my positive comments with the fact that everyone does, I think, agree that uncertainty is bad. And I think, especially in the context of any conversations with investors, any uncertainty on an investment is going to be a bad thing. It's going to increase the risk of it. So, yeah, I think people are just working with that uncertainty until things become clearer, but hoping that there are opportunities that come along with it.
So just want to set a challenge now. ISCT is 3 or 4 days, depending on whether or not you go to the pre-DAS world. Sum it up for me. I'll give you more than a word, but in one sentence, ISCT 2025, what was it in one sentence?
Cautiously, slowly making progress up that hill of steadily cracking away at the problems to ultimately scale and industrialize therapies.
My takeaway, my overwhelming impression in one sentence. What a terrible networking app. Full stop. Which kind of feeds on to probably my real summing up of the meeting, which is, and a word we haven't used yet in talking here, which is collaboration is still key. So I found the whole meeting a great opportunity. This is a long sentence. Great opportunity to meet up with colleagues, to meet up with even competitors in the industry, check in on the challenges, and look at how we can mutually push things forward for the betterment of reaching more patients, making cell and gene therapy a mainstream medicine.
So we're slowly climbing the hill. Collaboration is key.
Yep.
Jason, Dan, thank you very much.
Terrible app.